Professor Richard Wolff, I've told you guys about this before, that he has this economic update that he does. It's on a YouTube channel called Democracy at Work. I highly recommend that you follow that channel. They have a lot of good discussions on there. But recently he had a discussion with Noam Chomsky. And, Noam, last year I felt like he was starting to go astray, but now he's coming back. And I really like that. But this discussion in particular, they are talking about the U.S. empire. And there are some things that are said in this discussion that I think we really need to focus on. We need to pay attention to, because Noam Chomsky is basically going to explain to you why the United States government is behaving the way that they are currently, why they are pumping up their military power, and what we should expect to come in the future and how it was before. So let's go ahead and get into this. Again, great discussion.
To speak of a decline, of an end, if you like, of the U.S. empire in the world, the one that basically came into its modern form after World War II, something like the decline of the Roman or Greek or British Empire. Is that a reasonable understanding from your perspective?
Well, over a long stretch, the U.S. domination of the world has, of course, declined. It hit its peak, as you said, at the end of World War II. At that point, the United States had a position of global power that had no remote analog in human history. The U.S. controlled the Western Hemisphere, controlled both oceans, controlled the opposite sides of both oceans. Other industrial powers had been devastated by the war. The United States gained enormously economically through the war. Manufacturing production practically quadrupled. It had maybe 40, 50% of world's wealth. Nothing like that in history. Obviously couldn't last forever. In fact, within a couple of...
Okay, I just want to comment here for just a second. Basically, he's saying that the U.S. empire has been declining since after World War II. He goes on to say, there were some good days, there were some good times, but now it's gotten to the point where you have to realize and understand that this is not something that was going to be sustainable and it wasn't going to last forever. But that's what happens in a capitalist system. Something that I do wanted to point out. It's not sustainable. It's hard to continue to do that because, again, like I said, capitalism, it exploits people. So eventually it gets to the point where the people who are exploited, especially if they are exploited more so than usual, which has happened in the past couple of years, they get to a point where they get fed up and they don't want to do this anymore. Then what do? Now you're losing workers. And that's what you're seeing happen. We saw it happen. It was happening last year too, not just this year. People are just like, forget it. You won't give me the pay that I need. You won't treat me with the right type of decency that I deserve. I'm out. So this was never meant to last. And I hope people will fully take this conversation. Like after you hear this, I hope people will really take this to heart, that this was never meant to last. It was just something that was going to be good, that we could just ride for a little bit, and then eventually it was going to come crashing down. And that is what we are dealing with right now. So let's go back in, because he's going to talk about the military as well.
Of years, it declined. 1949, China became independent. What's called in the United States the loss of China. The terminology expresses the conception of how the world is supposed to be run. After that, industrial powers reconstituted themselves. The third world began to decolonize. You got the non-aligned movement. By about, say, 1970, the world was what's called tripolar. major center in North America based on the United States, in Europe based on Germany mainly, and in Asia at that point based mainly on Japan. Since then, other changes have taken place. Collapse of the Soviet Union gave a short period of euphoria in the United States. We can take over the world again. Of course, that couldn't last. We're now in a period where the analogy to the Roman Empire is not completely wrong. As in the case of Rome, the United States is under severe attack from within. The society is collapsing from within in many ways. Internationally, it has overwhelming power. So in the military dimension, no combination of states is even close.
Let's talk about something for just a second. The attack or the collapse that's happening with the United States economic system is happening from within. That's what Chomsky just told you. It's not like another country is doing this to us. It's happening right here from within inside our own country. Now, this is where the military aspect comes in, because internationally, that's where the United States government, for the most part, the United States empire, is still pretty much powerful. That's what the military is used for. This is why they're using the military industrial complex to take resources from other countries, to bomb people in countries like Somalia, the drone strikes that happen. That part, for the most part, is still pretty powerful. This is why they invest a lot of money into the MIC. But even that, it's gotten to the point where now even the military aspect of the United States is not enough to fix what is happening economically with the US inside our own country. Because again, it has gotten to a point where the people who are exploited have been even overexploited, and those people have started to say enough is enough. So you have all these companies right now that have worker shortages. The airlines have worker shortages right now. They don't know what to do. That's why all these flights are getting canceled. I just heard the other day that the Green Line going from Somerville going into downtown Boston is going to be shut down for 30 days, not because of repairs, but because they don't have enough people to work the line. This is the collapse that was bound to happen at some time or another because of the capitalist system that we live in. This is what happens when you have all these billionaires who have so much wealth concentrated at the top, and the rest of us are basically fighting for the crumbs that are left on the ground. This was not going to last for a long time. So now do you see why they continue to ramp up the military industrial complex? You continue to see why they continue to steal resources from other countries. That's all they got left right now. The United States, all that pretty much got left is the MIC. And there's no KEY. There's no MOUSE. Let's go back in.
But in other what's called soft power, like trade, commercial relations, and so on, it's being overcome by China. The United States is trying to hold it back, but doesn't know how to do it. You can't overcome economic development, infrastructure building, loans, and so on with bombs.
So he mentions China here, and he says the United States government is trying to hold them back, but they can't do it. Now, do you see where a lot of the fear mongering is coming in about China now? They can't do it. I'm going to show you some numbers after this video clip to show you about that as well.
So China's constructing this enormous Eurasian system. The Belt and Road Initiative includes India, Pakistan, Russia. It's extending to Africa, where China's now the main, has the major trade relations, even to Latin America, the United States back door. All the United States can do in response to this is use its comparative advantage in military force. So the US is now constructing what's called a ring of what are called sentinel states, heavily armed, aimed at China, advanced precision weapons, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, New Zealand, Australia. India is kind of a reluctant partner, not really participating. The idea is to try to prevent what's called Chinese aggression. What's Chinese aggression? Well, it's not off the coast of California. There are confrontations off the border of China, but the main Chinese aggression is its development.
There you go. That is spot on. I'm glad old Noam is back. That is spot on. What is the Chinese aggression? Development. They're doing well when it comes to trade. They're making their own products. Like there's some things like they don't really need us for. Like, to be honest, a lot of my former students were from China. So I knew about a lot of this because of them. But they don't really need us. So that's the aggression. Now, don't get me wrong. The United States governments will try to say things like, well, you know, they have these human rights violations, but that hasn't even been proven. I've talked to multiple people on the show about this issue, and no one has showed me any type of evidence that proves that. They have to say, give you something, right? So you understand why you're supposed to dislike them and you're supposed to fear that country. Because if they just tell you, well, you know, we really gotta, you know, look out for China because they have development and they're doing well economically and they're producing things and they're having like manufacturing in their own country and they're just doing so well. So we really got to look out for them. Yeah, because then like most Americans will look at you kind of shady eye. We look at you side eye and just be like, and no. So they have to tell you something that makes you afraid, that makes you really believe that the US needs to take them down because they don't want you to know the truth. It's all about the economy.
Which cannot be contained by military force. Now there's another conflict developing in Europe, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, in the short term at least, gave the United States a wonderful shot in the arm, great gift. It pushed Europe into the US pocket. There has been a background conflict since the end of the Second World War about whether Europe would be essentially a satellite of the United States within the NATO framework, the Atlanticist framework, or whether Europe would move on an independent course, become what was called a third force in international affairs, along lines sketched by de Gaulle, Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik, Gorbachev's proposals for a European common home from Lisbon to Vladivostok with no military alliances. That was another option. Well, for the short term at least, that's been blocked by Putin's invasion, which handed Europe over to the United States on a silver platter. Best gift he could have given Washington's imperial pretenses. Whether this could last is very much an open question, because it's not at all clear that Europe can really survive in any great viable way if it breaks from Russia and Eurasia. Notice that Russia is the barrier between Europe and the Eurasian landmass that China is developing so extensively, bringing in the East Asian economies. The U.S. is, if you look at it in what are called geopolitical terms, the U.S. now is kind of an exaggerated case of what England was for centuries. England was an island off the coast of Europe, and its main strategies were to try to keep Europe from becoming unified. The United States is now kind of an island off the coast of Eurasia, and its goals are to keep it from becoming unified. That means incorporating.
Yeah, that was a long answer there, but yeah, the United States does not want those countries to join forces together because it will be bad for the United States. They don't want those countries to realize the potential that they could actually have if they all work together. That would be bad for the United States. So I don't want to get too much into the Russia stuff because you guys know how YouTube is with this stuff. But I will say what he said there, it makes sense. It really makes sense. So it's gotten to the point where with a country like China, the United States government can't even use their military to be enough to stop their development now because China is considering continuing to grow. I'm going to show you the numbers in just a second. So that's something to keep in mind. So it's like, what do we do now? Oh, then we have to smear them. We have to make people fear them. So let's go back into the interview here.
Ask you then what seems to me the follow-up question. If it is correct, as you argue, that the United States, in some ways, perhaps Europe also, is tearing itself apart from within in the social divisions and class divisions and all the other fighting and splitting of the society apart, and then all it has to hold on to its empire is the military, it doesn't look really good for the United States to be falling apart inside and having to rely on military in the face of the Chinese and other economic powerhouse that outgrows the United States and has been doing that for 30 years. It does look like this is an effort to stop something that has very little chance of success.
That part right there. That's all we got now is the MIC. This is it. That's it. He hit the nail right on the head. Now let's hear what Noam has to say about this.
Well, it's very interesting to see how in the internally dysfunctional United States, this problem is being faced. So it's commonly observed that Congress is dysfunctional, can't do anything. That's a curious way of saying that the Republican Party has simply gone off the rails. They're not a parliamentary party in any traditional sense. Their policy is very explicit. McConnell announces it, is just block everything. Make sure that the country will be harmed as much as possible, so it will be blamed on the Democrats and we can retake power. It's quite open. He says it in almost those words. So the GOP blocks everything in Congress. But they accepted one thing, a China Competition Act. The United States is
I do have to interrupt him here and I have to make a correction. It's not just the GOP that's blocking everything in Congress. You also have Democrats that are blocking things in Congress. So I do want to correct him on this part. You have Sinema, you have Manchin, you also have the Senate parliamentarian. Everything is working the way that it is intended to work. That's what I believe. Based on things that I've read and research that I've done, everything is working exactly the way they intended to work. So I will say here, I think that it wasn't fair of him just to say that it's the GOP that's blocking everything, because we've seen it was just last night. I showed you who was blocking things on the Dem side. And we've seen that multiple times throughout Joe Biden's presidency, how many times Democrats have also been blocking these things, along with Kamala Harris not using her tiebreaker power as vice president and the Senate parliamentarian as well. So I do have to correct that there. You can't blame it all just on the GOP. Sorry, no.
U.S. infrastructure is falling apart. The bridges are collapsing. The electric grid doesn't work. And there's a sharp cutback in development. There's a huge shortage of chips because they're not producing chips here. So what can we do about it? One possibility would be to pass legislation to carry, as during the Second World War or the First War period, with massive government intervention to develop the economy. Can't do that. So therefore they passed the China Competition Act. We can rebuild our roads and bridges to compete with China. It's the only way it could get through. The only way the GOP would allow it to go through is a China Competition Act. Well, of course, it's symbolic of the internal destruction and disorder. We incidentally just today, learned something new about it. There's a new report that came out, which people should look at, from Axios, which is usually fairly reliable. It's a description of something that kind of slipped under the radar in the last days of the Trump years. Right before Trump left office, he had a directive establishing what was called Schedule F for civil servants, a plan to essentially remove the entire civil service system, at least the leading elements of it, and to replace them by Trump loyalists. The civil service bureaucracy has traditionally been basically nonpartisan, just keeps functioning, whoever's in office. But this was an effort to change it radically, to make sure that the leading elements are Trump loyalists, and they will run what's left of the government as an organization beholden to the ultimate leader. There's a name for that. That's outright fascism, not proto-fascism. Well, when Biden came in, he rescinded the order, but the Republicans are probably coming back, and there's now debate in Congress about what to do with them.
This is another part here where I would make a correction. I would not say that when Biden, took office that he restored order per se. You can be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's what I see Joe Biden as. Just because Joe Biden would say the right things and appear to look and sound more presidential, that does not mean that Joe Biden doesn't practice just as much fascism as Donald Trump does. Maybe different forms of it. It may be done in a different way. But I mentioned this on Twitter the other day. Joe Biden is also a fascist. So I think here is where Noam reads into this as an issue that only exists on the right. And that is not true. When you are trying to tell other countries what their people should and should not do, and African countries have been added to that list as well for Joe Biden, trying to tell them who they should purchase items from and so forth. When you are trying to starve people in other countries through sanctions that are put on them, when you are trying to basically have regime changes in those countries as well. Joe Biden is a warmonger, and he is also a fascist as well. Just because one is more blatant and may not be as obvious as the other doesn't mean the other isn't doing the same thing and it's just complicit as him. So that is something I would correct here, that he seems to have this blinder, that blue blinder on right now, where it's just the Republicans, blame everything on them, and let's pretend like the Democrats are not at fault here. That is not the case. So I do want to add that there. And I think we're about to wrap up this part of the interview.
House passed a resolution calling for legislation to block it. Senate's not going to accept it. GOP won't accept that because they want it to come back in.
Professor Chomsky, I wish we had much more time.
Yeah, so even that part there at the end, I'm sorry, he's not back. I told you guys, I was like, yeah, the older Chelsea, he's back. Not quite there. Even that part there at the end where he said things can't pass in the Senate because the GOP will block it. Who's been blocking things that could have definitely passed most of the time? It's been Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, or the Senate parliamentarian. So I don't know what's happening there. I don't know if he's just not paying attention to those pieces of legislation. I don't know if he's just focusing on the fact that it's the Republicans that are going to vote against those things anyway. But there have been several examples where things could have passed in the Senate and it was blocked by people who were on the Democrat team. So that's that. But the point that I wanted to drive home, and I want to show you these numbers here in reference to the U.S. empire. I really want to show you just how close China is to pretty much almost being up there with us. And I want to show you these numbers really quick. We're going to do a little bit of, I don't know. Let's do a little bit of teaching. You can get out your little notepad, take some notes if you want to. It's like I'm back in the classroom. All right, so this is what we want to talk about here, the top 25 economies in the world. And there are certain areas here that I want to show you in particular. So now, before I show you this chart, there's a chart here that I want to show you. I need to explain what some of these terms mean. So I don't want you to be like, what does that mean, Sabrina? So there are a couple of terms here that we need to focus on. Come out a little bit. That was really giant there. I don't know why it's that big. Okay. The first term here that we need to talk about, now we're talking about measuring GDP. Okay. The first term is called nominal GDP. Now, this is current US dollars. That's important to note because international comes in later. I'll explain. This is the most basic and common way of measuring and comparing GDP among countries using local prices and currencies converted into US dollars by using currency market exchange rates. This is the number that was used to determine the country's rankings in the top 25 list. So that is one column you will see in the chart. What is missing here, I'm surprised they don't have this in Investopedia. Nominal GDP is important to note here that this does not show an adjustment for inflation. So just keep that in mind when you see the numbers. So they should have had that there. Come on, Investopedia. Get with it. Get with it. Okay. So now let's go on to the second one here, which is purchasing power parity. So this is important. This is a different type of GDP. This is adjusted GDP in current international dollars. So now we're going to international dollars. This is an alternative way of comparing nominal GDP among countries, adjusting currencies based on what basket of goods they could buy in those countries rather than the currency exchange rates. This is a way to adjust for the difference in the cost of living among countries. All of these have a point, I promise you. So that's the second one, PPP, purchasing power parity. And then we get to these, which I think a lot of us will probably know anyway, which is GDP growth. This is the annual percentage growth rate of nominal GDP and local prices and currencies, which estimates how fast a country's economy is growing. We pretty much know that one. And last but not least is GDP per capita. This again is in current US dollars. This is nominal GDP divided by the number of people in a country. GDP per capita measures how much a country's economy produces per person rather than in total. That's important to note, guys. This can also act as a very rough measure of income or standard of living for individuals in a country. Now that I broke that down for you, let's take a look at that chart. Okay. These are the top 10 countries by nominal GDP at current US dollar exchange rates. Take a look at it, folks. Number one, of course, is the US. The nominal GDP is $20.95. Remember, nominal GDP does not adjust for inflation. It doesn't show that part. So just keep that in mind. The PPP GDP is $20.95 for the US. Annual growth. This is where we get into trouble, ladies and gentlemen. Negative 3.4%. That's where we're at now. Oh, you're going to let me highlight it? Thank you, Liner tab. Okay, go away. Negative 3.4%. So that's that. Now, GDP per capita for the US, $63,000, 206. Okay? Now let's look at China. And this is what I wanted to show you guys. When it comes to China, the nominal GDP in trillions, 14.72. They're not that far behind us. Remember, nominal GDP doesn't include the adjustment for inflation. Now, when we look at PPP for China, that is in trillions, 24.28. And now we're going to head over here to annual growth. Oh dear. You see the difference here? When it comes to China, in reference to annual growth percentage, their annual growth percentage is 2.3%, whereas the United States is negative 3.4%. GDP per capita for China, 10,434. Now let's circle back up to the top really quick. Remember what I told you about GDP per capita. So let's go look at that one more time. GDP per capita. This can also act as a very rough measure of income or standard of living for individuals living in a country. GDP per capita measures how much a country's economy produces per person rather than in total. So per person, you see the numbers here? There's a big difference. The United States has over $63,000. China has over $10,000. You see this annual growth? This is problematic. And in fact, I'm going to show you a quick recap real quick. If we scroll down, you'll see here that all the other countries, Japan, Germany, UK, India, France, Italy, Canada, South Korea, all of them are in the negative when it comes to the annual growth. The only one that is in the positive is China. So that's that. You know, I don't know how much to explain this. Like again, like an economist could explain this a lot better than I can. I'm just giving you the basics. I'm giving you the Cliff Notes. I don't know if everyone remembers Cliff Notes, but like when I was in school, it was like this thing. It was like a shortcut of reading a book. Instead of reading the whole, I don't know, the entire novel of Moby Dick, you could just read the Cliff Notes and it told you just the stuff you needed to know. This is the Cliff Notes. So anyway, I don't know what else to say other than the fact that we don't really produce much here. I'm sorry, but we don't. And our system in the United States, it's eating itself. Like, we're devouring each other. And we've had a lot of people, quit. And they have the right to do so, leave these jobs, leave the workforce and say, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore. And I'm sorry, but the bubble has started to burst. And I keep telling people, yes, are there some things that China may depend on us for? Some goods, maybe some, but they make things in their country. Most of the things that I buy, a lot of times it says made in China. I don't think I've ever bought something and it said made in the USA. I'm like, what's that? I don't even know what that is. So, yeah. You can share this with your friends, family members, peeps, a little short econ lesson from Sabby here tonight. But I don't know. I'm going to try to see if I can bring on an economist to really break this down for us, but yikes. It is what it is.